The glass slipped from Callie Reed's hand, shattering across the polished bar top and spraying tequila in every direction, including onto the dark suit of the man who'd just walked through the door. It was Tuesday night at Crimson, the upscale cocktail lounge where she'd been bartending for the past 8 months, and Tuesday nights meant he would come in the mysterious man who always arrived at exactly 11:40 p.m., ordered a neat scotch, and sat in the corner booth until closing time. "I'm so sorry." Callie grabbed a rag and rushed around the bar, dabbing at the stranger's jacket. "I don't know what happened, it's fine," the man said, his voice low and measured. He gently took the cloth from her hand. "I've been wearing this suit for 16 hours straight. It probably needed a drink more than I do." Callie looked up into his eyes, a startling blue that contrasted with his dark hair, and felt her face flush. "Still, I'm really sorry, Mr. Blake," he said. "Blake Zimmerman, and you're Callie, right?" She nodded, surprised. In 8 months of serving him drinks, they'd never formally introduced themselves. He'd always been polite but reserved, tipping generously but never engaging in the small talk she shared with other regulars. "How do you know my name?" she asked. A slight smile crossed his face. "You wear a name tag." Callie glanced down at her chest where, indeed, her name tag was pinned to her black shirt. "Right, of course." She felt like an idiot. "Your usual, on the house, obviously." "Thank you," he said, removing his jacket and loosening his tie as he made his way to his regular corner booth. Callie returned to the bar, acutely aware of his eyes following her. She prepared his drink, Macallan 18, neat, and brought it to his table. As she set it down, she noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "Rough day?" she asked, breaking their unspoken rule of minimal interaction. Blake sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "You could say that. 16-hour international conference calls tend to drain the life out of you." "Sounds important," Callie said, genuinely curious about this man who'd been a fixture in her work life for months. "Just tedious," he replied, taking a sip of his scotch. "But your bar always helps me decompress. It's the only place in the city where I can just be." Something in his tone made Callie linger at his table instead of returning to the bar. "Well, we're quiet on Tuesdays. That's why I like this shift." Blake studied her for a moment. "You're in graduate school, right? I've seen you studying here sometimes before opening." Callie was surprised again. "Yeah, architecture. My final thesis project is due in a few months." "That explains the building models and blueprint sketches," he said with a nod. "Ambitious field," says the man taking international calls for 16 hours, she countered with a smile. The corner of his mouth turned up. "Touché." The sound of breaking glass from the bar caught Callie's attention. "I should get back. My coworker Mike is great, but he's a disaster with the glassware." Blake nodded, and for the first time in 8 months, she saw regret in his eyes as she walked away. The rest of the evening passed with unusual energy. Every time Callie glanced toward Blake's corner, he was watching her. Not in a creepy way, but with genuine interest. And more surprisingly, she found herself constantly aware of his presence, inventing reasons to check on him, to refill his water, to ask if he needed anything else. At 1:45 a.m., 15 minutes before closing, Blake motioned for his check. Callie brought it over, along with a fresh glass of water. "Thanks," he said, sliding his black card into the leather folder without even looking at the bill. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." "Of course." Callie hesitated. "See you next Tuesday, then." Blake looked up at her, holding her gaze longer than he ever had before. "Actually, I was wondering if you might like to get coffee sometime, when you're not working." The question caught her off guard. 8 months of professional distance suddenly bridged with a coffee invitation. Callie found herself nodding before she even processed the question. "I'd like that," she said, surprised at how much she meant it. Blake smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "How about Thursday? There's a place called Criterion on 9th that has decent espresso." "Thursday works. I have class until 2, so 3 o'clock. Perfect." Blake stood up, gathering his jacket. He was taller than Callie had realized, his shoulders broader outside the confines of the booth. "I'll see you then, Callie Reed." As he walked out, Callie felt an unexpected flutter of excitement. She'd just made a coffee date with her Tuesday night regular, a man she knew virtually nothing about, except that he drank expensive scotch, worked long hours, and had the most intensely blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Who was that?" Mike asked, wiping down the bar. "I've seen him in here before, right?" "Just a regular," Callie said, trying to sound casual as she processed Blake's bill. She glanced at the receipt and froze. He tipped her $200 on a $45 tab, just a regular who tips more than 400%, Mike whistled, peering over her shoulder. "What exactly are you serving him, Callie?" She rolled her eyes at him. "Scotch and silence, which is apparently worth a premium in this city." Thursday afternoon arrived with unexpected nervousness. Callie changed outfits 3 times before settling on jeans and a simple blue sweater that her roommate once said matched her eyes. She arrived at Criterion Cafe at 3:05, scanning the crowded space for Blake. He was already there, sitting at a small table by the window, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him, in dark jeans and a gray Henley that emphasized his athletic build. When he spotted her, he stood up, that same transformative smile crossing his face. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," he said as she approached. "Why wouldn't I?" Blake shrugged. "People make polite agreements all the time, especially with customers." "Is that what you are, a customer?" Callie asked, sliding into the chair he'd pulled out for her. "I'd prefer to be Blake today, if that's all right with you." Callie smiled. "I think I can manage that." They ordered coffee, a simple Americano for him, a caramel latte for her, and fell into surprisingly easy conversation. Blake asked thoughtful questions about her architecture program, her thesis project on sustainable urban housing, and her career goals. He listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering insights that revealed a deeper knowledge of the industry than she would have expected. "How do you know so much about architecture?" she finally asked. A flicker of something hesitation crossed his face. "I work with a lot of development projects. You pick things up." "What exactly do you do?" Callie pressed, realizing she still knew almost nothing concrete about him. "Investment management primarily," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "But enough about work. Tell me about your family." Callie allowed the redirect, telling him about growing up in a small town upstate with her parents and younger brother. How her father, a contractor, had sparked her interest in building design. How she'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through undergrad before getting a scholarship for her master's program. "You're impressive," Blake said simply when she finished. Callie felt her cheeks warm. "I'm just persistent." "What about you? Where did you grow up?" "Chicago, originally. My father was in finance, my mother taught classical piano, very conventional upbringing." He smiled, but Callie sensed there was more to the story. "I moved to New York after college and never left." "And now you work in investment management and take 16-hour conference calls," Callie prompted. Blake's eyes crinkled at the corners. "And now I work too much and drink too much expensive scotch to compensate." "Well, as your scotch provider, I can't complain about that part." They stayed at the cafe for nearly 3 hours, long after their coffee was finished. When they finally stood to leave, Blake walked her outside. "I had a really nice time," Callie said, suddenly feeling shy. "So did I." Blake hesitated. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" "There's a restaurant in Chelsea I think you'd enjoy." "I'd like that," Callie said, a warm feeling spreading through her chest. "But just to be clear, this is a date, right? Not just a networking opportunity for an architecture student." Blake laughed, a rich sound she'd never heard before. "Definitely a date. I've wanted to ask you out for months." "Why didn't you?" "Professional boundaries," he said simply. "You were working. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable." Callie appreciated his consideration. "Well, I'm not working now." "No, you're not," Blake agreed, his eyes warm. "Can I call you to set up dinner?" They exchanged numbers, and Blake surprised her with a gentle kiss on the cheek before saying goodbye. As Callie watched him walk away, she couldn't help wondering who exactly Blake Zimmerman was when he wasn't sitting in her bar nursing a scotch. The following Tuesday, Blake didn't come to Crimson. Callie told herself she wasn't disappointed. They had texted several times and planned dinner for Friday, but she found herself watching the door at 11:40 nonetheless. By 12:30, she knew he wasn't coming. Just after 1 a.m., her phone pinged with a text. "Sorry I couldn't make it tonight. Tokyo markets are a mess, looking forward to Friday. Callie smiled at her phone, ignoring Mike's raised eyebrows from across the bar. Friday evening, Blake picked her up in a sleek black car with a driver, which seemed excessive until they pulled up to Le Bernardin, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants. Callie suddenly felt underdressed in her simple black dress and department store heels. "You didn't tell me we were coming here," she whispered as they were led to a prime table. "Is it okay?" Blake asked, looking genuinely concerned. "I should have mentioned it. We can go somewhere else." No, Callie insisted, though her stomach was doing flips. "It's just very fancy." Blake relaxed. "The food is worth it, I promise." The maitre d' greeted Blake by name, and the sommelier appeared instantly to discuss wine options. Callie noticed how the staff treated him with deference that went beyond normal customer service. "You come here often?" she asked after they'd ordered. Blake shrugged. "Occasionally for business dinners." "Must be some business," Callie said, glancing around at the Michelin-starred setting. "Investment management seems lucrative." Something flickered in Blake's eyes, the same hesitation she'd noticed at the cafe. "It can be," he said simply. "But tonight isn't about business. Tell me more about your thesis project." Callie allowed the subject to change again, but filed away her growing curiosity about exactly what Blake did and how well it paid. Throughout dinner, which was indeed spectacular, Blake was attentive, asking insightful questions and sharing stories that made her laugh. He had a dry wit that hadn't been apparent during his quiet evenings at the bar. After dinner, they walked along the High Line, the converted railway that served as an elevated park. The spring evening was cool but pleasant, and Callie found herself moving closer to Blake's warmth. "So," she finally said, "are you ever going to tell me what you really do?" Blake looked at her with surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean that normal investment managers don't get tables at Le Bernardin without reservations, or have drivers waiting outside, or tip bartenders hundreds of dollars." Blake was quiet for a moment. "Would it change things if I told you?" "That depends on what you're hiding," Callie said honestly. "If you're married, yes, it would change everything." "I'm not married," Blake said quickly. "Nothing like that." "Then what?" he sighed, stopping to look out over the city lights. "I founded Zimmer Tech when I was 26. It went public 4 years ago." Callie stared at him. Zimmer Tech was one of the largest tech companies in the world. Even she, with her limited interest in the corporate world, knew that name. "You're that Zimmerman, Blake Zimmerman, the billionaire tech founder," he nodded, looking uncomfortable. "That's why I like your bar. Nobody there cares who I am. I'm just a guy having a drink." "And I'm just the bartender," Callie said, trying to process this information. Blake Zimmerman was on magazine covers. His company made the software that powered half the devices in America. "You were never just the bartender, Callie," Blake said softly. "You were the woman who made me want to stay until closing time every Tuesday just to watch you work, to see you laugh with customers or concentrate on mixing the perfect cocktail. To listen to you talk about architecture with that one professor who always sits at the end of the bar." Callie felt warmth spreading through her chest, but uncertainty crept in as well. "Why would someone like you be interested in someone like me?" Blake's brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" "You know what it means. You're you, and I'm a grad student who bartends to pay rent." Blake took her hands, his expression serious. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Callie? I see someone passionate, hardworking, and brilliant, someone who makes everyone around her feel special. Someone real in a world where I'm surrounded by people who only see what I can do for them." Callie felt tears prick at her eyes. "You don't even know me." "I want to," he said simply. "I've wanted to for months." She looked up at him, at this man who had quietly observed her for the better part of a year before finding the courage to ask her for coffee. "So all those Tuesday nights were the highlight of my week," he finished. "And yes, I scheduled international calls around them to make sure I could be there." Callie couldn't help but laugh. "That's either incredibly sweet or slightly stalkerish." Blake smiled, relief crossing his features. "I prefer to think of it as dedicated customer loyalty." She leaned in closer. "So what happens now that I know who you are?" "That depends on you," Blake said, his hand still holding hers. "Does it change how you feel?" Callie considered the question honestly. It's intimidating, she admitted. But no, it doesn't change how I feel about you. I just liked having coffee with Blake, who works too much and drinks expensive scotch. The billions are complicated. I'm still that same guy, he assured her. The money just means I have more complicated problems and can afford better scotch. Callie laughed, and Blake used their joined hands to pull her closer. May I kiss you, Callie Reed? Her answer was to rise on her toes and press her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, then deepened as Blake wrapped his arms around her. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. So that's a yes to seeing where this goes, Blake asked, his forehead resting against hers. That's a definite yes, Callie replied. Over the next few weeks, Callie's life took on a surreal quality. She was still the same grad student, still pulling shifts at Crimson, still stressing over her thesis project, but now she was also dating one of the wealthiest men in New York. Blake did his best to keep things normal, often meeting her after her shifts for late-night diner food instead of fancy restaurants. He came to her tiny apartment and seemed genuinely comfortable on her second-hand couch, helping her work through difficult design problems for her thesis. For his part, Blake seemed to relax more with each day they spent together. He confessed that most of his social interactions were performative charity galas, investor meetings, industry events where everyone wanted something from him. With you, I get to just be a person, he told her one evening as they sat on her fire escape, sharing Thai takeout. Do you know how rare that is? Callie was beginning to understand. The first time paparazzi photographed them together outside a restaurant, she'd been shocked. The first time she Googled Blake and found articles estimating his net worth at over $14 billion, she'd had a minor panic attack. But the man himself, the one who remembered how she took her coffee and listened intently to her passionate rants about sustainable architecture, that man was becoming increasingly important to her. 6 weeks after their first coffee date, Blake invited Callie to his home for the first time. She'd been expecting something lavish, but was still unprepared for the reality of his penthouse overlooking Central Park. The space was sleek and modern, with walls of glass and an open floor plan that showcased spectacular views. This is... Callie trailed off, unable to find the right words. Too much? Blake asked, watching her reaction carefully. Breathtaking, she corrected him. The proportions, the light, the way the space flows. Who was your architect? Blake smiled. Tanaka Associates, they're based in Tokyo. I've studied their work, Callie said, running her hand along a concrete column. The materiality is incredible. Blake's eyes softened as he watched her professional assessment. Only you would come into this place and immediately analyze the architecture instead of the amenities. Well, the infinity pool is also very impressive, Callie teased, gesturing toward the terrace where blue water shimmered in the evening light. Blake laughed, pulling her into his arms. That's what I love about you. You see past all of this to what matters. The word love hung in the air between them. They hadn't said it yet, though Callie had been feeling it grow with each passing day. What matters is you, she said softly, meeting his gaze. Not any of this. Blake's expression grew serious. I love you, Callie. I think I started falling for you the first night you explained the difference between whiskey and bourbon to that obnoxious customer at the bar. Callie laughed, even as tears welled in her eyes. You remember that? I remember everything about you, Blake said. The way you twist your hair when you're concentrating, how you always taste the drinks you make before serving them, the little dance you do when you think no one's watching. Callie felt her heart expand. I love you too, she whispered, even though you overtip and secretly run a tech empire. Blake's answering kiss was deep and passionate, and soon they were stumbling toward his bedroom, clothing being discarded along the way. Their lovemaking was tender and intense, and afterward, as they lay tangled together in his enormous bed, Callie felt a sense of rightness she'd never experienced before. Move in with me, Blake murmured against her hair. Callie propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. What? Move in with me, he repeated, his eyes serious. I know it's fast, but I've never been more certain of anything. Blake, Callie hesitated, I love you, but there's so much to consider. My schoolwork, my job, you could finish your thesis here, he said. I have plenty of space for a work area, and if you want to keep bartending at Crimson, that's fine too. It's not just practical considerations, Callie said carefully. I need to make it on my own to finish what I started, and your world, it's complicated. Blake nodded, understanding in his eyes. Too complicated? No, Callie said firmly. Just different from what I'm used to. I need to find my footing in it gradually. So that's a not yet, Blake asked, hope evident in his voice. Callie smiled. That's a not yet. But a very promising not yet. Blake pulled her back into his arms. I can work with that. As spring turned to summer, Callie and Blake settled into a relationship that balanced their very different worlds. Blake came to her thesis presentations, sitting quietly in the back and beaming with pride as her professors praised her innovative designs. Callie accompanied Blake to a few carefully selected events, learning to navigate the scrutiny that came with dating one of New York's most eligible bachelors. There were challenges. Some of Blake's wealthy friends clearly thought Callie was a gold digger. Some of Callie's classmates treated her differently once they learned who she was dating. But the core of their relationship, the connection they'd begun building during those late nights at Crimson, remained solid. In July, Callie received the news that her thesis had won the department's annual Design Excellence Award, which came with a grant to develop her concept further. Blake took her to dinner to celebrate, back to Le Bernardin where they'd had their first formal date. I have something for you, he said after they'd ordered champagne. Blake, you didn't need to get me anything, Callie protested. The dinner is celebration enough. It's not exactly a gift, he said mysteriously, sliding a folder across the table. More of an opportunity. Curious, Callie opened the folder to find renderings of a large-scale development project. As she flipped through the pages, she recognized elements of her thesis design incorporated into the plans. What is this? She asked, looking up at Blake in confusion. Zimmer Tech is building a new innovation campus in Brooklyn, he explained. Affordable housing is part of the community benefits package. The development team saw your thesis presentation and wants to bring you on as a design consultant for that component. Callie stared at him. You did this? Blake shook his head firmly. I didn't. My head of development went to your thesis exhibition. I specifically told him you were off limits for special treatment. He came to me afterward and said your work was exactly what they'd been looking for. This is legitimate, Callie. It's your talent, not your connection to me. Callie studied his face, seeing only sincerity. This would be my first real professional project, if you want it, Blake said. No pressure, you could take other offers. Are there other offers? Callie asked, a smile starting to form. Blake grinned. Apparently, several firms requested your contact information after the exhibition. I might have heard something about that. Callie laughed, overwhelmed with happiness. This is really happening, isn't it? My career, us, everything. It really is, Blake confirmed, reaching across the table to take her hand. You're extraordinary, Callie Reed. I knew it the first time I saw you expertly handle that drunk banker who was bothering the other customers. You mean when I cut him off and called him a cab? While also making him feel like it was his idea to leave, Blake nodded. That's when I started coming back every Tuesday. Callie squeezed his hand, and here I thought it was for the scotch. The scotch was good, Blake admitted, but you were the reason I kept coming back. After dinner, they walked along the river, Callie still processing the opportunity she'd been given. As they reached a quiet spot overlooking the water, Blake suddenly stopped. There's something else I wanted to talk to you about, he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. Callie turned to him, concerned by his tone. What is it? Blake took both her hands in his. These past few months have been the happiest of my life. Before I met you, I had success but not joy. I had achievements but not meaning. Callie felt her heart begin to race as Blake dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. Callie Reed, you walked into my life serving scotch and asking about my day, and somehow you became the center of my world. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. I love your brilliance, your compassion, your determination, and the way you still cut me off after 3 drinks even though I have a driver. Callie laughed through the tears that had started to form. I want to build a life with you, Blake continued, opening the box to reveal a stunning but tastefully sized diamond ring. Not because of who I am or who you are, but because of who we are together. Will you marry me? Yes, Callie whispered, then louder, yes. Blake slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to pull her into a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. 1 year later, Callie stood in the kitchen of their new Brooklyn brownstone, reviewing blueprints for the now under-construction Zimmer Tech campus housing. Her role had expanded from consultant to lead designer for the affordable housing component, launching her career in exactly the direction she'd hoped. Blake came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder to look at the plans. "Those look great," he said, pressing a kiss to her neck. "The sustainability features are impressive. They're going to be beautiful homes," Callie agreed, leaning back into his embrace. "Homes people can actually afford even in this neighborhood." "Speaking of this neighborhood," Blake said, "I ran into Mike from Crimson today. He said they miss you behind the bar." Callie smiled. She'd quit bartending 6 months ago to focus on her design career, though she occasionally stopped by Crimson for a drink with her former coworkers. "I miss it sometimes," she admitted. "The energy, the people, but I love what I'm doing now." "We could always go back for a visit," Blake suggested. "Tuesday night, for old time's sake." Callie turned in his arms to face him. "You just want to sit in your corner booth and make eyes at me across the bar." "Can you blame me?" Blake grinned. "It worked out pretty well the first time." "It did," Callie agreed, rising on her toes to kiss him. Who would have thought that the quiet Tuesday regular would turn out to be a billionaire tech genius who'd propose within a year? And who would have thought that the brilliant bartender would turn out to be an award-winning architect who'd actually say yes? Blake countered. Callie looked around their home, comfortable but not ostentatious, a perfect blend of their tastes, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the life they were building together. "I'm glad you overtipped," she said with a teasing smile. Blake laughed. "I'm glad you finally asked my name." "I'm glad you came in late on Tuesdays," Callie said softly. "I'm glad you worked nights," Blake replied, pulling her closer. As their lips met in a tender kiss, Callie knew that whatever the future held, career challenges, public scrutiny, the ups and downs of any relationship, they would face it together, just as they had from that very first shattered glass at Crimson's bar.